The encounter. Mark's head throbbed as he slowly opened his eyes. He was lying on the soft, damp ground, surrounded by towering, glowing trees. The air smelled sweet and metallic, unlike anything he'd ever breathed before. As he tried to sit up, he realized his spacesuit was torn, and his helmet lay shattered a few feet away. "What happened?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. The last thing he remembered was the ship shaking violently, a bright flash of light. Then nothing. Now he was stranded on an alien planet with no sign of his crew or any way to contact Earth. Mark stumbled to his feet, scanning his surroundings. The forest seemed alive, the plants moving slightly as if they were watching him. It was unsettling. He gripped a broken piece of metal he'd found nearby, a makeshift weapon. He wasn't sure what dangers this place held, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. As he walked cautiously through the strange terrain, he heard a sound, a soft, melodic hum. He froze. The sound wasn't natural. It wasn't the wind or the movement of the trees. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was nearby. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. The humming stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from behind a cluster of shimmering blue bushes, a figure emerged. Mark's breath caught in his throat. It was a woman, or at least she looked like one. Her skin was a pale silver, almost luminous, and her hair flowed like liquid gold down her back. Her eyes, a deep violet, seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. She was dressed in something that looked like armor, but it shimmered and shifted as she moved. Mark tightened his grip on the piece of metal, his instincts screaming at him to run. But the woman raised her hand slowly, a gesture of peace. "Please," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I mean you no harm." Mark hesitated. She spoke perfect English, but her accent was unlike anything he'd ever heard. It was musical, almost hypnotic. He lowered his weapon slightly but kept his distance. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Where am I?" The woman took a step closer, her expression unreadable. "You are on Coriolis, a planet far from your home. My name is Nora. I've been waiting for you." Mark blinked, confused. "Waiting for me? How do you know who I am?" Nora hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Finally, she said, "You don't remember me, do you?" "Should I?" Mark shot back, his suspicion growing. He didn't like where this was going. Nora's violet eyes softened, and for a moment, she looked almost sad. "We met once before, a long time ago. You wouldn't remember. I erased your memory to protect you." Mark's head spun. This was insane. He had no memory of meeting any aliens, let alone one like her. He took a step back, shaking his head. "You're lying. I don't know you." Nora sighed, lowering her hands. "I knew you wouldn't believe me. But I gave up everything to see you again, Mark. I couldn't let you face this alone." Mark's blood ran cold. How did she know his name? His grip on the metal bar tightened. "What do you want from me?" Nora didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into a small pouch on her belt and pulled out a device that looked like a glowing orb. She pressed a button, and the orb projected a hologram into the air. Mark's eyes widened as he saw himself in the hologram. He looked younger, maybe 5 or 6 years younger, standing in what looked like a laboratory. Next to him stood Nora, her expression softer, less guarded. They were talking, though the hologram didn't play sound. "What is this?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the truth," Nora said. "You were part of something bigger than you realized, something dangerous. I saved you, Mark. And now, I need your help to save your people." Mark stared at her, his mind racing. He wanted to dismiss her as crazy, to say this was all some elaborate trick. But the hologram, it felt real. Too real. Before he could respond, a loud roar echoed through the forest. Both Mark and Nora turned toward the sound. The trees in the distance swayed violently, as if something massive was moving toward them. "We don't have much time," Nira said, her voice urgent. She stepped closer, her hand outstretched. "You have to trust me." Mark hesitated, his heart pounding. He didn't know who this alien woman was or what she wanted. But if what she said was true, if she really had given up everything to find him, then maybe, just maybe, she wasn't lying. The ground shook as the roaring grew louder. Whatever was coming for them was getting closer. Mark looked at Nira, then at the approaching danger. He made his choice. "Fine," he said, gripping her hand. "But you'd better start explaining. Fast." A connection beyond worlds. Mark tightened his grip on Nira's hand as they ran through the alien forest. The roaring behind them grew louder, shaking the ground and sending birds, or what looked like birds, flying from the treetops. The soft, glowing plants seemed to shrink away as the vibrations intensified. "What is that thing?" Mark shouted over the noise. Nira didn't look back. "A tracker beast. It's been following me since I landed here. We need to keep moving." Mark gritted his teeth and pushed himself harder, his legs burning with every step. He didn't trust this strange alien woman. Not yet. But whatever was chasing them wasn't something he could handle alone. Ahead, Nira pointed to a massive tree with an opening at its base. "In there," she commanded, pulling him toward it. They ducked inside just as the beast crashed through the trees behind them. Mark caught a glimpse of it, a hulking, four-legged creature with scales that shimmered like oil under the alien sky. Its eyes glowed a fiery orange, and its claws looked sharp enough to tear through steel. Inside the hollow tree, Nira pressed a button on her wristband. A faint hum surrounded them, and the air seemed to shimmer. "A cloaking field," she explained, breathing heavily. "It won't see or smell us in here." Mark leaned against the wall of the tree, trying to catch his breath. "Great, now you can explain what's going on. Start with why that thing was chasing you." Nira glanced at him, her violet eyes unreadable. "Because I broke the rules. My people don't want me here, Mark. I wasn't supposed to come back." "Back," Mark repeated, frowning. "You're saying you've been to Earth before?" "Yes," she admitted. "I was part of an observation team assigned to study humans. We were never meant to interfere, but I did." Mark stared at her, his mind reeling. "Interfere how?" Nira hesitated, then pulled out the glowing orb she'd shown him earlier. This time, the hologram that appeared was different. It showed Mark lying unconscious on a table, surrounded by strange, advanced machinery. Nira stood nearby, her face filled with concern. "You were dying," she said quietly. "Your ship had been damaged during a mission. My team found you floating in space, barely alive. Protocol demanded that we leave you, but I couldn't. I brought you aboard our vessel and saved your life." Mark's stomach twisted as he watched the hologram. The memory felt distant, like a dream he couldn't quite recall. "You saved me. Why don't I remember any of this?" "I erased your memory before we returned you to Earth," Nira explained. "It was the only way to protect both of us. If my people had discovered what I did, I would have been exiled, or worse." Mark ran a hand through his hair, trying to process what she was saying. "Why are you telling me this now? Why come back after all this time?" Nira's expression grew serious. "Because something has changed. My people have been debating what to do about humanity for years. Many believe your kind is too dangerous, too unpredictable. They want to isolate Earth permanently, cut it off from the rest of the galaxy." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "And what do you think?" "I think they're wrong," Nira said firmly. "Humans are flawed, yes, but you're also capable of incredible things. I've seen it. That's why I risked everything to come here, to warn you." "Warn me about what?" Nira hesitated, then said, "There's a plan in motion. My people are deploying a device that will create a barrier around your solar system. No one will be able to enter or leave. It will cut humanity off from the stars forever." Mark's heart sank. He had always dreamed of a future where humanity would reach out into the galaxy, exploring new worlds and making contact with other civilizations. To think that future could be stolen away so easily. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice low. "You could have stayed with your people and followed their rules. Why risk your life for us?" Nera's gaze softened. "Because of you, Mark. Saving you changed me. It made me see humans differently. You're not just a species we should observe from afar. You're worth fighting for." Mark didn't know how to respond. He wanted to doubt her, to dismiss her words as manipulation. But the way she looked at him, the quiet conviction in her voice, it felt real. Before he could say anything, the ground shook again. The tracker beast was still outside, circling the tree. Mark tensed, gripping the metal bar he still carried. "What do we do now?" Nera activated her wristband again, projecting a map of the surrounding area. "We need to reach my ship. It's hidden in the mountains to the north. Once we're there, I can show you more. Everything you need to understand what's at stake." Mark nodded, his determination hardening. He still didn't fully trust her, but he couldn't ignore the weight of her words. If what she said was true, then humanity's future was in danger, and he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. "All right," he said. "Lead the way." As they prepared to leave the safety of the tree, Nera gave him a small, almost grateful smile. "Thank you, Mark, for trusting me." "Don't make me regret it," he replied, gripping his weapon tightly. With the tracker beast still prowling outside, they stepped out into the unknown, their journey just beginning. The sacrifice. The tracker beast's roars faded into the distance as Mark and Nera climbed higher into the alien mountains. The terrain was steep and unforgiving, covered in jagged rocks that shimmered under the strange pale light of Coriolis's twin moons. Nera moved with grace, her silvery skin glowing faintly, while Mark struggled to keep up, his muscles aching with every step. "How much farther to your ship?" Mark asked, panting. "Not far," Nera replied, her tone calm but urgent. "It's hidden in a cave near the summit. We'll be safe once we're there." Mark doubted the safe part. He had already encountered more danger in a few hours on this planet than he had in his entire career as an astronaut. Still, he pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and the growing sense that Nera was telling the truth. Her story about saving him, the holograms, it all felt too real to dismiss. As they rounded a bend, Nera suddenly stopped and held up her hand. Mark froze, his grip tightening on the metal rod he still carried as a weapon. "What is it?" he whispered. Nera's violet eyes scanned the horizon. "We're being watched." Mark's blood ran cold. He followed her gaze but saw nothing. The mountains were eerily silent, the only sound the faint whistle of the wind. "By what?" "Not what," Nera said grimly. "Who?" Before Mark could ask what she meant, a bright beam of light shot down from the sky, striking the ground a few feet away. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the air, knocking Mark off his feet. He scrambled to his knees, his ears ringing, and saw 3 figures descending from the sky. They were tall, their forms sleek and alien, clad in armor that shimmered like liquid metal. Each carried a weapon that looked like a cross between a staff and a blade, glowing with blue energy. Their faces were obscured by helmets, but Mark could feel their cold, calculating gaze. "Nera," one of them said, their voice amplified and distorted. "You've violated the covenant. Stand down." Mark glanced at Nera, who had drawn a small, glowing dagger from her belt. Her expression was tense but defiant. "I won't go back," she said. "I've made my choice." "This isn't about you," the figure replied. "It's about preserving the balance. Humans are a threat to the galaxy, and you know it." "They're not a threat," Nera snapped. "They're misunderstood. They deserve a chance to prove themselves." Mark got to his feet, his heart pounding. "Hey, I'm right here, you know. Maybe you could ask me what I think instead of talking about my species like we're animals." The lead figure turned to him, their helmet tilting slightly. "You don't understand the forces at play here, human. Your kind's survival is incidental." "Incidental?" Mark bristled. "We're not just going to roll over and let you decide our future. You have no right." "Enough." The figure interrupted, raising their weapon. "Nira, step away from him. Return with us, and we'll consider leniency." Nira didn't move. "No, I won't let you do this. If you want me, you'll have to take me by force." Mark stared at her, his mind racing. These weren't just random aliens. They were her people, and they wanted her back badly enough to send soldiers after her. And yet she was willing to defy them. For him, for humanity. The lead figure sighed, their tone almost regretful. "So be it." In a blur of motion, the soldiers charged. Nira moved faster than Mark thought possible, her dagger flashing as she deflected a blow aimed at her head. Mark ducked as another soldier swung at him, the glowing blade narrowly missing his face. He lashed out with his metal rod, managing to knock the weapon from the soldier's hands. "Nira," he shouted, "a little help here." She spun toward him, slashing at the soldier, who retreated with a snarl. "Stay close to me," she called, her voice sharp with command. Mark didn't need to be told twice. He moved closer to Nira, their backs almost touching as they faced off against the remaining two soldiers. The fight was chaotic, the air crackling with energy as weapons clashed. Mark's arms ached from swinging his makeshift weapon, but he refused to back down. Finally, with a well-placed strike, Nira disarmed the lead soldier and pressed her dagger to their throat. "Call off the others," she demanded. The soldier hesitated, then raised a hand. The others froze, their weapons lowering. "This isn't over," the lead soldier said, their tone icy. "You can't protect him, or his people. The council will act, with or without you." Nira's expression hardened. "Tell the council that if they want Earth, they'll have to go through me." The soldier's helmet tilted, as if considering her words. Then, without another word, they activated a device on their wrist. In a flash of light, they and the other soldiers vanished, leaving Nira and Mark alone. Mark collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. What the hell was that? Nira knelt beside him, her expression a mix of relief and determination. That was just the beginning. The council won't stop until they get what they want. Mark looked up at her, his mind spinning. "And what do you want, Nira? Why are you risking your life for us?" She held his gaze, her violet eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "Because you're worth it, Mark. Humanity is worth it. I believe that, even if no one else does." Mark didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure he believed her, not completely. But as he looked at the determination on her face, he realized something. She wasn't going to give up. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't want her to. "Let's get to your ship," he said finally. "If we're going to save humanity, we'll need a plan." Nira smiled faintly. "Agreed. Let's move." Together, they climbed toward the summit, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on their shoulders, unveiling the threat. The climb to Nira's ship was grueling, the alien mountains growing steeper and more hostile with every step. The air thinned as they ascended, forcing Mark to stop frequently to catch his breath. Nira, in contrast, seemed almost unaffected, her movements fluid and precise as she navigated the jagged rocks. "Do all your people have superhuman endurance?" Mark asked, his voice strained as he hauled himself over a particularly large boulder. Nira glanced back at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Adaptation is a necessity in my world. Your people would call it evolution. But I'm impressed you've kept up this far." "Gee, thanks," Mark muttered, brushing sweat from his forehead. They finally reached a plateau, where Nira gestured toward a shadowy opening in the cliff face. "The ship is in there. We'll be safe once we're inside." Mark squinted at the dark cave. "Safe from what? Those soldiers you scared off." Nira's smile faded. "Safe from everything. For now." Mark didn't like the sound of that, but he followed her into the cave. Inside, the walls glowed faintly with bioluminescent moss, casting an eerie blue-green light. The air was cooler, and the silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the echo of their footsteps. At the far end of the cave, Nira approached what looked like a smooth metallic wall. She pressed her hand against it, and the surface rippled like water before solidifying into a doorway. Beyond it was the interior of her ship. Mark stepped inside and couldn't help but stare. The ship's design was sleek and alien, with curved walls that seemed to pulse with faint rhythmic light. The control panels were covered in glowing symbols that shifted and rearranged themselves, as though alive. "Make yourself comfortable," Nira said, moving to one of the panels. She tapped a series of symbols, and the ship hummed to life. Mark sank into a chair that molded itself to fit him perfectly. "You weren't kidding about advanced technology. This makes Earth's spaceships look like toys." Nira didn't respond immediately. Her focus was on the panel in front of her, where a holographic map of the galaxy appeared. Mark leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. The map was dotted with hundreds of glowing points, each one representing a star system. "This is the network," Nira said, gesturing to the map. "A collection of connected civilizations spanning thousands of worlds. My people are one of its founding members." Mark nodded slowly. "And Earth isn't part of it?" "No," Nira confirmed. "Humans are considered too unpredictable, too volatile. The Council believes your kind poses a threat to the balance of the network." Mark frowned. "What kind of balance?" Nira zoomed in on the map, focusing on a small glowing point surrounded by a faint pulsing barrier. "This is Earth's solar system," she explained. "The Council plans to deploy a device that will generate a permanent isolation field around it. Nothing will be able to enter or leave. Humanity will be cut off from the rest of the galaxy forever." Mark stared at the hologram, a sinking feeling in his stomach. "They're just locking us up, like we're some kind of dangerous animal." "To them, you are," Nira said softly. "They've seen the wars, the destruction. They believe humans are a threat that can't be controlled." Mark's jaw tightened. "And you? Do you think we're a threat?" Nira turned to face him, her expression serious. "I think humanity has the potential for great destruction, but also for great good. You're a young species, still finding your place in the universe. I believe you deserve the chance to prove the Council wrong." Mark leaned back in his chair, trying to process everything. It was one thing to imagine aliens watching Earth from afar, but to know they were debating whether to cut humanity off from the stars, it was overwhelming. "So, what do we do?" he asked finally. "How do we stop them?" Nira hesitated, then brought up another hologram. This one showed a massive structure orbiting a distant star. The device was cylindrical, with glowing rings that pulsed with energy. "This is the isolation field generator," she explained. "It's being built in secret on the outskirts of the network. Once it's complete, it will be deployed to your solar system." Mark studied the image, his mind racing. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," Nira admitted. "The device is nearly finished. We'll need to act quickly if we want to stop it." Mark stood, his resolve hardening. "Then let's do it. Let's take it out before they can use it." "It won't be that simple," Nira warned. "The generator is heavily guarded, and my people will be watching for any sign of interference. If we're caught—" "We won't get caught," Mark interrupted. "You risked everything to warn me about this, didn't you? We can't just sit here and let them decide humanity's future." Nira studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But you need to understand something, Mark. If we do this, there's no going back. My people will see it as an act of treason." "Why do you care what they think?" Mark asked. "You already left them." Nira's gaze softened. "Because I still hope they can change. That they'll see humanity the way I do." Mark felt a pang of guilt at her words. She had given up everything for a species that might never even know she existed. He couldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. "Let's stop that generator," he said firmly. "Together." Nira smiled, a hint of relief in her expression. Together. As the ship prepared to launch, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into something far bigger than either of them. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. They might be outnumbered and outmatched, but they weren't out of options. And as long as Nira believed in humanity, so did he. They shared past. The ship hummed softly as it cut through the dark expanse of space, its sleek frame gliding toward the coordinates of the isolation field generator. Mark sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the stars streak past. The weight of Nira's revelation pressed on his mind, heavy and unrelenting. Somewhere out there, an alien council had decided humanity was too dangerous to be left unchecked. And yet, the only one willing to give humans a chance was sitting beside him, a woman who wasn't even human herself. Nira's fingers danced over the holographic controls, her violet eyes focused on the data streaming across the interface. Mark studied her silently, wondering what had driven her to defy her people so completely. "You haven't told me everything, have you?" he asked suddenly. Nira paused, glancing at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Mark said, leaning forward, "you said you saved my life and erased my memory. You said you're risking everything for humanity. But why? What's the real reason you're doing all this?" Nira hesitated, her fingers stilling on the controls. For a moment, she looked almost vulnerable, as though the question had touched a nerve. Finally, she sighed and turned to face him. "You deserve to know," she said quietly. "But it's not an easy story to tell." Mark leaned back, crossing his arms. "I'm listening." Nira activated a small orb on the console. It projected a hologram into the air, this one different from the ones he had seen before. It showed Earth, seen from space, surrounded by a web of glowing energy. The view zoomed in, revealing the younger Mark standing in a lab. He was hooked up to alien machinery, his body frail and lifeless. "This was you," Nira said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Your ship had been caught in a solar flare. You were dying when we found you. My people would have left you there, calling it natural selection. But I couldn't." Mark's throat tightened as he stared at the hologram. He looked so helpless, so small. "Why couldn't you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Nira turned off the hologram and looked directly at him. "Because I saw something in you, Mark, something I'd never seen before. Even as you hovered on the brink of death, there was a spark, a will to live, a defiance of the odds. It made me question everything I'd been taught about humans." She leaned forward, her voice growing more intense. "Saving you wasn't just about defying protocol. It was about proving to myself that humans are more than what the Council believes. You aren't just creatures of destruction. You're capable of resilience, of hope, of change." Mark felt a lump rise in his throat. He didn't know how to respond. The idea that Nira had seen something in him, something worth saving, was overwhelming. "That's a lot to live up to," he said finally. Nira smiled faintly. "You've already lived up to it. You're here, aren't you? Fighting for your people's future." Mark nodded, though doubt still gnawed at him. "But what about the Council? If they're so set on isolating Earth, why risk everything for one man's spark?" Nira's expression hardened. "Because the Council isn't infallible. They operate out of fear of what humans might become if given the chance. I refuse to let fear dictate the future of an entire species." Mark studied her, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. "You care about humans," he said, "more than you're letting on." Nira's gaze softened. "I care about you, Mark. Saving you changed me. It made me see humans differently, not as subjects to study, but as beings with potential. I couldn't let the Council take that away." Mark's chest tightened. He wasn't sure what to say. Part of him wanted to reject her words, to dismiss them as some kind of misplaced idealism. But deep down, he knew she was telling the truth. her actions, her sacrifices. They all pointed to something real, something undeniable. Before he could respond, the ship's alarm blared, breaking the moment. Nira's attention snapped back to the controls. "We're approaching the generator," she said, her tone all business. "Scanners are picking up multiple patrol ships in the area." Mark leaned forward, peering at the display. The isolation field generator loomed in the distance, a massive structure suspended in orbit around a glowing star. It was surrounded by smaller ships, their sleek frames bristling with weapons. "What's the plan?" Mark asked. Nira tapped a few controls, bringing up a schematic of the generator. "We need to disable its power core. If we can overload the core, it will destroy the entire structure. But we'll have to be careful. Those patrols won't hesitate to attack us." Mark nodded, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Let's do it." Nira glanced at him, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "You're braver than you realize, Mark." He managed a small smile. "Or just stupider. Either way, let's give them hell." As the ship plunged toward the generator, Mark couldn't help but feel the weight of what lay ahead. They were two against an entire network of enemies. The odds were impossible. But as he looked at Nira, he felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. A daring plan. The isolation field generator loomed larger on the ship's view screen, a towering construct of alien engineering. Its glowing rings pulsed rhythmically, sending waves of energy rippling across the surrounding space. Patrol ships buzzed around it like worker bees protecting their hive, their sleek frames armed with weapons that could obliterate Nira's vessel in seconds. Mark stared at the generator, a mix of awe and dread tightening his chest. How do we even get close to that thing without being turned into space dust? Nira's hands moved deftly across the controls, her expression calm but focused. Their sensors are advanced, but they rely on pattern recognition. If we mimic the energy signature of one of their ships, we can slip past the patrols, at least for a while. Mark raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do we do that?" She turned to him, a faint smirk on her lips. "We improvise." Before Mark could respond, Nira activated a device on the console. The ship's exterior shimmered, its energy signature shifting to match the patrol vessels. On the view screen, the surrounding ships adjusted their flight paths slightly, their sensors now registering Nira's vessel as one of their own. "That's impressive," Mark admitted. "Let's hope it holds," Nira said, her tone serious. "Once we're inside the generator, the disguise won't matter. We'll have to move quickly." The ship glided closer to the generator, weaving through the patrols with nerve-wracking precision. Mark's heart pounded as they approached a docking bay on the side of the massive structure. Nira maneuvered the ship expertly, aligning it with the bay's entrance. "Docking complete," she announced. "But the hard part starts now." Mark stood, gripping the metal rod he'd been carrying since their escape from the forest. "What's the plan once we're inside?" Nira activated a hologram of the generator's interior. "The power core is located at the center of the structure. It's heavily guarded, but if we can reach the control room, we can overload the core remotely." Mark studied the hologram, his mind racing. "And what happens if we overload it?" Nira hesitated. "The generator will be destroyed, but the resulting explosion will likely take out anything within a 100-mile radius, including us." Mark swallowed hard. "Great, no pressure." Nira gave him a small, reassuring smile. "We'll find a way to escape. Trust me." He nodded, though doubt lingered in the back of his mind. Trusting her had gotten him this far, but this mission felt like a death sentence. Still, what choice did he have? If they didn't stop the generator, humanity's future would be sealed. Inside the beast, the docking bay was eerily silent as they stepped out of the ship. The walls pulsed faintly with energy, casting the area in a cold blue light. Nira moved swiftly, her dagger in hand, while Mark followed closely behind, his makeshift weapon at the ready. "Stay close," she whispered. "The guards patrol in pairs. If we're spotted, A sudden noise cut her off. Footsteps echoed down the corridor ahead, accompanied by faint mechanical chatter. Nira pressed herself against the wall, motioning for Mark to do the same. 2 alien guards appeared, their armor gleaming under the blue light. They carried weapons that looked far deadlier than anything Mark had ever seen. He held his breath as they passed, his grip tightening on his weapon. Once the guards were out of sight, Nira gestured for him to follow. They moved quickly but quietly, navigating the maze-like corridors of the generator. The air grew warmer as they approached the core, the faint hum of energy growing louder with every step. "This is it," Nira said as they reached a large, reinforced door. She tapped her wristband, and the door's locking mechanism began to flicker. "Hurry up," Mark urged, glancing over his shoulder. He had a sinking feeling their luck was running out. The door finally slid open, revealing the control room. The walls were lined with consoles, each displaying streams of alien data. At the center of the room was a massive energy conduit, its glowing rings pulsating with raw power. Nira rushed to one of the consoles, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm accessing the core now. Once I trigger the overload, we'll have about 5 minutes to get out of here." Mark nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. "Let's hope 5 minutes is enough." The fight for survival. Before Nira could finish, an alarm blared through the control room. Red lights flashed, and a voice echoed over the intercom in an alien language. "They've detected us," Nira said, her voice tense. "I need more time." Mark turned to the doorway just as a group of guards stormed in, their weapons aimed and ready. "We've got company," he shouted, stepping in front of Nira. The first guard lunged at him, but Mark swung his metal rod with all his strength, knocking the weapon out of the alien's hands. Another guard fired a shot, the energy blast narrowly missing Mark as he ducked behind a console. "Nira, whatever you're doing, do it faster," he yelled. "I'm almost there," she replied, her fingers flying over the controls. Mark fought off another guard, adrenaline surging through him. He wasn't a soldier, but desperation drove him to fight harder than he ever thought possible. For every guard he knocked down, 2 more seemed to take their place. Finally, Nira shouted, "The core is overloading. We have to go. Now." Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed Nira's hand, and they bolted out of the control room, alarms blaring around them. The corridors shook violently as the generator began to destabilize, sparks flying from the walls. "This way," Nira shouted, leading him toward the docking bay. The heat was almost unbearable by the time they reached the ship. Nira scrambled to the controls, and the ship roared to life. Mark collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, his chest heaving. "Are we going to make it?" he asked. Nira's hands flew over the controls as the ship shot out of the docking bay. Behind them, the generator glowed brighter and brighter, its rings spinning out of control. "Hold on," Nira shouted. The explosion was blinding, a massive wave of energy that engulfed the generator and everything around it. Nira's ship surged forward, narrowly escaping the blast radius. The shockwave rocked the vessel, but it held steady. As the glow of the explosion faded, silence filled the cockpit. Mark looked out the view screen, his heart pounding. The generator was gone, reduced to a field of debris. "We did it," Nira said, her voice trembling with relief. "The generator is destroyed." Mark leaned back, his body heavy with exhaustion. "Yeah," he said, a faint smile on his lips. "We did." But as he looked at Nira, he couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was far from over. The final choice. The cockpit was eerily silent as the ship drifted through the aftermath of the explosion. The isolation field generator, once an imposing symbol of the Council's power, was now a scattered field of debris glinting in the light of the nearby star. Mark slumped in his chair, his body aching and his mind reeling. They had succeeded, but at what cost? Nira sat at the controls, her expression a mix of relief and deep worry. Her violet eyes scanned the monitors, confirming that the explosion had taken out the generator completely. But as her gaze flicked to the long-range scanners, her expression darkened. "They know," she said softly, her voice filled with dread. Mark straightened in his seat. "What do you mean?" Nera turned to him, her face unusually pale. "The Council. The destruction of the generator sent out a ripple across the network. They'll trace it back to us. We've just declared war, Mark." Mark swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him. "So, what now? We run?" Nera shook her head. "Running won't solve anything. The Council will see this as an act of rebellion, not just by me, but by humanity. They'll double their efforts to isolate Earth, or worse." Mark leaned forward, his fists clenched. "Worse? What's worse than trapping us in our solar system?" Nera hesitated, then said quietly, "Eradication." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Mark's stomach churned as he imagined fleets of alien ships descending on Earth, their weapons wiping out entire cities. He couldn't let that happen, not after everything they'd just fought for. "There has to be another way," he said, his voice shaking. "We can't just let them do this." "There is another way," Nera said, her tone cautious. "But it's risky." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Riskier than blowing up their generator?" Nera managed a faint smile. "Yes. I need to go back, Mark. To the Council. I have to stand before them and plead humanity's case." Mark stared at her, stunned. "You can't be serious. They'll arrest you, or worse." "I know," Nera said, "but it's the only chance we have. If I can convince them that humanity deserves a place in the network, it could change everything. They respect strength and conviction. Destroying the generator proved our strength. Now, I have to show them our conviction." Mark shook his head, his heart racing. "You can't do this alone. Let me come with you." Nera looked at him, a mix of admiration and sadness in her gaze. "No, Mark. They won't listen to you. To them, you're just a human. But I'm one of them, or at least I was. If anyone has a chance to sway them, it's me." He clenched his fists, anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. "So, what? You're just going to sacrifice yourself for us?" Nera reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not a sacrifice, Mark. It's a choice. One I made the moment I decided to save you all those years ago. Humanity is worth fighting for, even if it costs me everything." Mark's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong. But deep down, he knew she was right. She was the only one who could stand before the Council and make them see the truth. And if she didn't go, Earth's future would be sealed. "Okay," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But if you're going, I'm not letting you go empty-handed." A message of hope. The ship's small communication room buzzed with energy as Mark recorded his message. Nera stood nearby, watching silently as he spoke directly into the camera. "My name is Mark Keller," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I'm a human, and I know my species isn't perfect. We've made mistakes, terrible ones. But we've also done incredible things. We've cured diseases, explored the stars, and created art that inspires hope. We're not just creatures of destruction. We're more than that." He paused, his eyes burning with conviction. "I don't know if you'll listen to this, but I'm asking you to give us a chance. Don't judge us by our worst moments. Judge us by what we could become, given the opportunity. Humanity isn't just worth saving. We're worth believing in." When he finished, Nera stepped forward and placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you, Mark. This will mean more than you know." Mark nodded, his jaw tight. "You'll make sure they see it." "I promise," Nera said. The final farewell. The ship neared the Council's homeworld, a massive planet surrounded by rings of light and bustling with alien activity. Nera prepared a small escape pod, its systems calibrated to deliver her directly to the Council's chambers. Mark stood at the hatch, his heart heavy. "This feels like goodbye." Nira smiled softly. It's not. One way or another, I'll find my way back to you. He wanted to believe her, but the odds felt insurmountable. Still, he forced a smile and reached out to clasp her hand. Good luck, Nora. Good luck to both of us, she replied. The pod's hatch sealed, and Mark watched as it launched toward the planet, a single spark of hope in a galaxy filled with uncertainty. As the pod disappeared from view, Mark felt a strange mix of pride and fear. Nira was risking everything for humanity. And for him. He turned back to the ship's controls, his mind racing with possibilities. No matter what happened, he wasn't done fighting. Humanity's future was still unwritten, and he intended to help shape it. The Council's verdict. On the Council's world, Nira stood before the assembly, her voice clear and unwavering as she made her case. She played Mark's message, his words echoing through the chamber like a beacon of hope. The council members murmured among themselves, their expressions ranging from skepticism to intrigue. Finally, the leader of the council stood, his voice resonating through the hall. "We will deliberate," he said. "But know this, Nira, your actions have consequences." "I understand," Nira replied, "but so does your decision." As the assembly dissolved into heated discussion, Nira stood tall, her heart pounding. She had done all she could. Now, it was up to them. And the future of two worlds hung in the balance.